this is going to be a nice introduction because I don't know if you have seen this summary that some Lovecraft fans have made about you, and you're gonna have the opportunity to correct it when
Ah,
after I read it. So
all right.
let's see it. Peter Hughes Cannon, born in 1951 in Palo Alto, California, United States, uh, is an editor, H.P. Lovecraft scholar, and an author of the Cthulhu mythos fiction. Cannon's writings on Lovecraft include The Chronology Out of Time, Dates in the Fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, and Sunset Terrace Imagery in Lovecraft. He edited Lovecraft Remembered, a collection of reminiscences by friends and acquaintances of Lovecraft, and co edited More Annotated H.P. Lovecraft with S.D. Joshi. He also wrote a personal memoir about another writer in the Lovecraft circle, Long Memories, Recollections of Frank Belknap Long. His fiction includes Pulp Time, in which Lovecraft, Long, and Sherlock Holmes join forces to solve a mystery, Scream for Jeeves, a parody, which retells some of Lovecraft's stories in the voice of P.G. Wodehouse, Bertie Wooster, and The Lovecraft Chronicles, a novel based on Lovecraft's personal life. So, that's about right?
Yes, that's accurate. That's accurate. That I think may come from my Wikipedia page.
Nice. Probably they got it. Probably they got it from there. And Peter, the first thing that I wanted to ask you, because we started exchanging emails about Frank Belknap Long, and you obviously worked a lot with Lovecraft, and I want to know how this all this thing started. I will give you my example. When I was a teenager, my aunt, I had an aunt who is a professor at modern arts, and she gave
Mhm.
me a small pocketbook with the Call of Cthulhu. And I
Mhm.
was 12. And she shouldn't give that to a 12-year-old, by the way. But I was amazed by it, and I didn't stop reading Lovecraft. When was your big? Oh, I really like this stuff.
All right. Well, as a boy, I discovered I like Edgar Allan Poe and sort of ghost stories. Uh, but then when I was about 12 and I was going to a private day school in Massachusetts, I had a history current events teacher who liked to read stories to the class when he'd done the required work. I mean, this is incredible now. Happen today, even a private school. And he was fond of supernatural horror. And he had this one book called Great Tales of Terror and the Supernatural. And he read stories, and I realized I really like these stories too. But the two stories that he read that stood out the most to me were The Rats in the Walls and The Dunwich Horror. So this sort of confirmed my interest in this particular genre. But at that time, as much as I liked the Lovecraft stories, I did not focus on him as an individual author. It was some years later when I was a senior in high school that I happened to be passing through a bus station in Boston and saw these two paperback collections of Lovecraft stories. One was the Dunwich Horror, the other the Color Out of Space. And of course, remembered his very distinctive name. I bought these two collections, and that's when I really became hooked on Lovecraft as a, a horror author, and wanted to read as much as I could of his work. I soon after discovered Arkham House and the selected letters, and I just loved his letters because they show a side of him not shown in his fiction. Sense of humor, his love of cats, his interest in ancient Rome, and his travels. Uh, I became very um, uh, interested in him as a personality and as a writer. At the same time, through him, supernatural horror literature. I moved on to Arthur Machen and M.R. James and some of these authors I might have discovered anyway, but he provided a guide to uh, the genre. This is so really when I was in college that I became a devoted fan. And if I may say, this was also about the time Stephen King came on the scene.
Wow.
But but I have to say, I was a little too King was a little too late for me in that I read all this sort of classic stuff from earlier in the 20th century, where a lot of it is the style, the way it's said, and also it's something typical of Lovecraft. He made a point of he's not interested in human characters. His stories have virtually no dialogue. He has,
Exactly.
there's monologue, and this is largely true of many of these other writers. And so, someone like Stephen King, I grant you his genius, just more conventional stories about real people. And what I liked about Lovecraft and some of these others was not about ordinary life, where anyway. So that's where I sort of became rooted uh, in Lovecraft and sort of more or less his generation. And while I did read some later authors, uh, my heart really remains with what I would consider the classics in the supernatural horror genre.
That makes total sense. And just a quick question: were the books easy to find? Because of course in the USA would probably be easier, but in Brazil, for example, it was really tough to find any of them. But at that time in the USA, could you buy could you have a Lovecraft collection easily?
Yes, in that Arkham House had published Lovecraft's complete fiction in 3 volumes in the early 70s. Now, I had at first just those 2 paperbacks, and a major story that I didn't have was The Shadow Out of Time. It had not been collected, and I ended up at college borrowing The Outsider and Others, Lovecraft's first collection from Arkham House, a very rare volume from the rare book library, and reading The Shadow Out of Time
Nice.
in a rare book room. But soon afterwards, yes, the Arkham House volumes became available, and then his fiction started being published in mass market and became widely available. Uh, there was an article around 1973, 74 in Time magazine commenting on the phenomenon that he'd become a kind of underground bestseller in paperback, selling more than 1 million copies
Oh my
of
God.
his. Uh, and the funny thing is that it was more the sort of the minor stuff, the secondary stories, the best stories that were collected in the Dunwich Horror and the Color Out of Space. Those collections, for some reason, were not as available. It seemed to me, anyway, for a while, it seems the best of Lovecraft was not easy to have, but eventually, basically everything became widely available. And it was also at this time in the 1970s that I discovered I wasn't alone in my interest. I felt as if I were part of this very small group that appreciated this unusual author. and that leads probably to the next big event in my life as far as my Lovecraft education, which was attending the first World Fantasy Convention in Providence
Yes.
50 years ago now. I just moved to New York. I had a roommate, and he said, "Oh, you should see this in the newspaper. There's going to be this convention in Providence devoted to Lovecraft." And I said, "Well, gosh, this is something I have to attend." And that's where I uh, met others and got connected to what was then uh, sort of the Lovecraft subculture, which centered on the esoteric order of Dagon,
Yes.
Amateur Press Association, and there was a psychology professor named Dirk Mosig, if you know that name,
Yes.
who was the, in essence, the leader, leading academic. But there was also Barton St. Armand at Brown, who had written, a couple of excellent pieces on Lovecraft. And I went to Brown for a year of graduate school where I got my master's degree and wrote my master's thesis under St. Armand's guidance on Lovecraft there. So that's when I was entered this wider world. And then I received a letter in the mail from someone named S.T. Joshi,
Oh,
who I
Jesus.
who I thought was, must be some college professor or something. Although how I'm not sure how he didn't mislead me in any way, but he said he preparing a collection of Lovecraft criticism. He'd heard that I made through Dirk Mosig that I'd written a couple of things, and would I be interested in contributing? Gosh, I was very surprised that he was still in high school
Yes.
at this time, and yet he was able to pull together this anthology of essays that was published as 4 decades of criticism by, I think, Ohio University State Press. Gosh, I don't know, 1979, 1980, somewhere around there. And that was my first book, as it were, in which I had a contribution. So that was a very exciting
Of
uh,
course.
thing for me.
Yeah.
Uh,
And in a subject that you loved, right?
right.
That
Um,
that's brilliant. Oh, I thought you were going to say something. Sorry.
no,
Uh,
no, sorry. I want to give you a chance to
no.
move things along.
And there was something that you said that that is really striking for me. You were talking about the letters, the selected letters volume, and in the selected letters you could see a part of Lovecraft's personality, and this is very interesting because I have the sensation that sometimes people desire that Lovecraft were this obscure and dark guy, but when you read the letters, he was really, really, really funny. Uh, uh,
Yes, yes.
there is a letter between Lovecraft and Long that Long tells him he's using Lovecraft's name in Space Eaters,
Yeah.
and he says, but I didn't complete the sentence. He is tall, square jawed, and yeah, and then Lovecraft replies saying thin.
Yeah,
Puts that at
yeah,
the end. Thin,
right. I think lean was the word he used.
lean. Yes,
As a
lean.
synonym for thin. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there are many moments like that in Lovecraft's letters where you as a reader, you can't help but be won over by his charm, his personality, his he makes fun of himself. He's very self-deprecating. He, of course, underestimates his own uh, skill as a writer, and so forth, and it, his letters. Some of them can get very tedious, to be honest, and
Very long.
go on. There's so many are long, almost book length. And I have to say some of them certainly I found tedious, but uh, by and large, I've made an effort over the years to collect all the letters volumes, and I, as I told you, recently read through the letters course to between him and Frank Long, and I found many delightful things,
Yes.
mainly from Frank, but also there's stuff from Lovecraft too, and the back and forth between them. It's really, in its way, a lot of fun
Yes, very fun.
uh, to, to see, actually, see them get a real sense of what they were like back in the 20s, 30s, uh, the beginning of their friendship, and how Frank could give as much as he took from Lovecraft, and didn't let him
Yes, it's
be
amazing.
be steamrolled by him, because I think many of Lovecraft's correspondents were much younger, and were sort of intimidated by his learning, and didn't challenge him. But I was pleased to see that Frank didn't hesitate to go after him when he had a disagreement.
Yes, and they had many disagreements. That is something really interesting because you see that Frank, he's really kind-hearted, and when I mean kind-hearted, I'm also thinking about politically, and he was in a very different spectrum than Lovecraft when we think about people and political regimes and empathy. And you see that he is always kind of teaching Lovecraft too. He is saying, "Oh, okay, you should also consider this, and you should understand that this is wrong, that this is a better way." So
Right.
even with the disagreements, they could build this incredible friendship.
Yes. Yes. Despite the real disagreements, as they were uh, at that time, you know, the closest of friends. And I think Frank said at some point in a letter, rather poignantly at the end, "I've always considered you my best friend." And I think it's fair enough, although Lovecraft had many friends, that Frank stands out as maybe the supreme friend, uh, of this of his life.
When I was writing the introduction for the Hounds of Tindalus that we are going to publish, and I was super happy that you could read my text. Um, I found myself in that scenario that I was writing about Frank, but I could not forget Lovecraft. I couldn't make an introduction and talk about Frank Belknap Long and remove Lovecraft from the equation. It's simply not
Right.
possible. They sort of in especially in the end of the 20s and the 30s, they become like inseparable. It doesn't matter if they are in New York together or not. They are reviewing papers, they are editing, they're writing, they are complaining about weird tales and about the money.
Yes.
It's, you just can't separate them, right?
Right. Right. No. They're inextricably linked. This period, uh, and that you know both makes Frank special, but it also gives him there's a certain kind of almost a handicap to say, okay,
Yes.
because of your association with Lovecraft in his later years, that's what people mainly
Exactly.
are drawn to you for,
Exactly.
like it or not, and that's something he had to live with in his old age, and uh, it had its rewards, but also it's the downside as well for him. As
The psychological impact probably was huge. Um, of course, I didn't meet Frank in person, but even if he hid that, I think that he was not happy about it. It's not possible that you are happy about people talking to you specifically because your best friend was like Elvis. Uh,
Right, right.
is not possible. And but coming back to you, that is something that I really wanted to ask you because some weeks ago I read Pulp Time, and for the people that are listening to us, Pulp Time is a story by Peter H. Cannon where you have Sherlock Holmes. This is the best because you have Sherlock Holmes and you have Lovecraft and you have Frank Long, and that was like that was genius, Peter. I don't know how you came up with that idea, but I think that putting the three personalities together in a story was genius because it really really works. If you associate Lovecraft with other famous uh, fiction personalities, it wouldn't work so well. You really needed this really smart and old detective that is talking to this really smart and wannabe old writer, and then you have the protege, which is Frank Long. So for me, it worked perfectly. Uh, do you remember what was the moment, if this moment existed, that you decided, oh, I'm going to publish Lovecraftian fiction. I'm going to be a fiction writer as well. Because you started writing essays and reviews. So when was the moment of transition?
That's a that's a good question. You're right. I started out. I wanted to write criticism, essays, reviews. I had no uh, desire to try to emulate Lovecraft or this kind of writing. But one day, I don't know. I got the itch. I can't say it was like I saw the light, and I say the first thing I wrote was called gosh, like the madness out of space, I think,
Nice,
and
nice title.
which I tried to do it as a as close to a Lovecraft imitation as I could, and so that was my first published work fiction. It was a long story. I didn't want to do a short Lovecraft. I wanted to sort of emulate one of the longer cosmic stories. And to be honest, I don't think it's all that good.
Oh, I gotta read that. I'm just googling it right now. So it's Eldritch Tales number 80.
It was published. It was serialized, I think, in two issues
Oh,
of
I'm
Eldritch
gonna
Tales.
I'm gonna read this.
But it's also been reprinted in a couple of anthologies.
Yeah,
Uh,
Robert Price. Robert
yeah,
Price.
Price. Yeah, and also it's reprinted in one of my story collection, more recent story
Yes,
collections,
Forever Azathoth.
Forever Azathoth.
This
So
is
so it's
gold.
it's available, but to be honest, it's to me kind of a youthful exercise.
Yeah, but
but
that's normal.
but anyway, so that's where I got the impulse. But then later, you may be, of course, aware of the 7% Solution by Nicholas Meyer,
Hmm.
which was a best-selling mystery novel
Amazing book.
where Holmes meets Sigmund Freud, and you get the whole backstory about Holmes's lost years and so forth. And yes, I mean, a brilliant concept and worthy bestseller. And I said, "Gosh, well, what if Lovecraft met Sherlock Holmes?" And then I thought, well, who's going to tell this story? Who's going to be the Watson? And by this time, I was, at least acquainted with Frank. I said, "Aha, this is the obvious narrator." And then I thought, well, how are we going to get Sherlock Holmes to New York? And I thought of an idea, a background, a gimmick to get him to New York. And as you mentioned earlier, what I was really interested in wasn't trying to tell a good mystery story, I wanted to see the three personalities interact and be true to their characters and see how they would behave put in this situation. I mean, I think the plot is just something to hang, the
Yes,
scenes
it's
with
like
yeah, yeah. I mean, as others have pointed out, is that's not the strength of the book, and the main appeal of the book is in the characters, and I thought of a good enough gimmick to kind of explain and have kind of a big revelation at the end that's kind of a spoiler. So uh, anyway, I was satisfied with it as basically a short novel. And I did hear it was popular with Sherlockians, and Sherlockians felt that I'd been true to Holmes. I reread the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes to try to get at least some of his language uh, down right, and so that was my first major foray into fiction, and so
and
uh,
I really like that story. And you talked about the voice of Sherlock Holmes. And in all the books, I always feel that Sherlock Holmes, he is just a little condescending because he knows he is extremely smart. And
yes,
in your story, you captured that really really well. And it's funny because we also have a person who is a little condescending, that is Lovecraft.
right.
And Jesus, Peter, it's so good. I think
Yeah,
that
well, that's right. Holmes condescends to Lovecraft.
yes,
He's
exactly,
on the receiving end, whereas Lovecraft is somewhat condescending to Frank.
exactly.
And
It's
there's
crazy.
a
It's a ladder. It's a
oh
ladder.
yeah, a ladder, a little chain.
It's really
That's
awesome.
that's that's a that's a fair observation. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. And if people that are listening to us doesn't know about Frank Belknap Long, I think, Peter, that we can say that the Hounds of Tindalus was like the big story, right? We have a
I
lot of
think that's it. Yes, yes, that was the
right.
story for which he's mainly known. Yeah.
Yeah. And that is also an anthology called The Hounds of Tindalus in the USA, right? By Arkham House. I think it was
Yes, yes. Arkham House did it.
right.
A collection called The Hound of Tindalos. I have a used copy of it
Oh,
in my
that
bookshelf.
I'm just a little jealous of that, but no problem. When I travel to the USA, you have to be careful with your collection because
Ah,
and then we have 50 years later, when I was translating the book, I discovered that Price organized the Tyndall cycle, and then we have uh, what's the name? In Portuguese, it's Limiar para o Eterno, but in English is Gateway to Forever. Uh,
oh, is it so one a round robin tale where somebody
yes,
writes the first section, then somebody else picks up
and
another,
no, but
or is this, or
no, this one was
is this
written by Frank.
something else? Oh, then that's its own
It's
right. It's
the
its own work.
Yeah, he is
That's right.
continuing the Hounds of
Oh,
Tindalus.
oh, it's a sequel
Yeah,
to the Hounds of
and it's
Tindalos.
amazing. And for those who don't know, we are our translation has both of them. So we have the Hounds of Tindalus, and we have Gateway to Forever, so people can see Frank touching a subject with 50 plus years of
Right,
difference.
right,
It's
right.
amazing. Uh, and I was so happy when I discovered that Mr. Peter Cannon, who I'm talking to right now, wrote the letters of Helping Chalmers. And
Oh
Jesus, and it's so good. And Helping Chalmers is the guy. This is not a spoiler. I'm sorry, people, but
no, go ahead.
the House of Tindals is from 1920s. Helping Chalmers dies in the Hounds of Tindalus, and he is this really badass occult guy, and he is investigating. He's trying new drugs,
Yeah.
uh, And why you once again you got it right with Pop Time is brilliant the idea, and this is another brilliant idea. You get the guy who died, and you talk about his letters, and at the same time we can make a connection between helping Chalmers and Lovecraft and Long and
Right,
Lita.
right. Yeah.
uh, but that was another brilliant idea. Can you talk to us about it?
Um, gosh, there's a famous Henry James story, the Aspirin Papers, uh, which is about a a collector who is trying to seduce this woman who owns some manuscript written by uh, this guy's literary hero, and things sort of don't work out for him in the end. So I sort of took that as the plot line, and then just sort of translated into uh, sort of present day Frank Long, and pretending that Halpin Chalmers went on to have this kind of mythic career posthumously. And because when I was seeing Frank and Lita, there was talk about Frank having a trunk full of papers, uh, of manuscripts, or letters. Who knows? And I said, "Aha! What if he really did have this cache of really valuable writings?" And I think the truth is that anything of value he
Yes.
sold over the years, long before I got to know him, and that there was really nothing left. Uh, so, uh, yeah, but what if there had been? And so that was the idea behind my story. And I've written. That's just one of several stories I've written that were inspired by my relationship with Frank, and they're collected in. Well, it's a little complicated. There are two or three editions of Forever Azathoth, which is a story collection first published in the UK in 1999, and then later published here in the US, drawing a blank on the publisher, where I sort of rearranged and added to the contents. But anyway, the latest incarnation has a section called something like you know the Partridgeville stories,
Yes.
that they're roughly 5, 6 stories, including the letters of Hope and Chalmers, and others, in which Frank and Lita appear, usually disguised under different names, but are obviously themselves. So I, I have whatever else I've Frank to thank for inspiring me
Yeah.
to write these stories that may not be so complimentary to him, but all I can say is that they come from real life,
Ah, no,
uh,
totally, totally.
and in their way, I like to think they're sort of tributes to him. But I I couldn't help have a kind of almost visceral response to uh,
Yes.
the emotions that I experienced throughout my relationship with him, and writing these stories was a way to somehow
And the people
deal
who
with that.
anybody who reads long memories, they will be very they will have a very clear idea, because long memories was the first book that I read from you, and it was very good to read the facts section, and then you go to the text, and then you go to pulp time, and then you go to Happy Chalmers and Final Fight.
Yeah, the fiction. Yeah,
Yes, it's so good because you have a really clear idea of your process and of the impact that meeting them has had on you. And
That's right. I decided, to do it. The first part, the facts. The second part, the fiction, and the connections are clear
brilliant.
as you read through the
And
volume.
Peter, what was it like for you to meet him? Because you told me that you read Lovecraft, so probably you read Clark Ashton Smith, Fritz Leiber, Frank Long, I suppose. And,
Yes, I read those other
right,
authors, not widely. I was never a big Clark Ashton Smith fan. I read some of the Robert E. Howard Conan stories, and
right.
uh, yeah. So I had some background there.
You
So
knew the
uh,
guy, like you
well,
heard about him, right?
yes, well, to backtrack to the First World Fantasy Convention, I knew he was a guest there. I write about it, in Long Memories. I actually sort of spot him. I think we arrived about the same time, Saturday morning, checking in. And again, I'm not sure I mentioned this, but in the book, but uh, I got his autograph at one point.
You
There was a
mentioned it.
program, okay, a program booklet, and I don't know who else was there. There were other writers. I got them to sign it. And so my first actual interaction with him is said, "Oh, please, can you sign my program book?" And that was the end of it. And I probably saw him on panels, uh, but it was only after the convention where I was corresponding with Dirk Mosig, and he encouraged me to look Frank up. And again, I write about that. Uh, it was some years later when I actually arranged to meet him and went to his apartment building on West 21st Street. And I think it was kind of anticlimactic the first time. Sorry, he was too busy.
Totally, totally.
He was overwhelmed with never had so much work, and it remained for another time where I had a proper first meeting with him. And then there were sort of other people, other fellow Lovecraftians in New York, who became part of a group who would make the effort to uh, meet with Frank. Typically, we would meet at a modest place for lunch somewhere in his neighborhood, and then he would come join us. Uh, and so I got to know him more,
Did he
as part
take
of a larger
Lida with
group.
him? Did he take
No,
Lida
that's
with him?
no. He very deliberately left her at home. He knew she could be potential trouble, and was for the first few years very careful not to include her. Now she was in a wheelchair. She was a semi-invalid, so it was somewhat logistically difficult
Yes.
for her. Uh, but it was only some years later, actually, when I wrote Pulp Time, that she became curious to meet me, and that first meeting with them also included my first wife. Of course, is
Yes.
the prologue that sort of
That's
starts off with a
crazy.
starts off with a bang. Just couldn't have anticipated
No.
just what this scenario of them uh, living impoverished, and oh gosh,
You
well,
fall. Basically, you felt when I was reading. I said, "Oh my God, Frank." Oh, sorry. Peter fell into a very complex soap opera because when you see the scenario, when you see the personalities, and you see the bitterness, it is something that is really rock and roll. And but that is also the fact that you were kind enough to, because I don't know how many people, Peter, that I know in a situation like that they would come back. and they would help, and they would, I think that you really took the high road there.
Well, thank you. I will say at first that's what I tried to do, and I sort of felt, in some ways, this is the price I'm paying for having appropriated Frank Long as the narrator of my story. Okay, I'm using him for my personal purposes in a work of fiction, and yes, he got some money out of it, but there was a much higher price that I discovered that I had to pay. Now, I wasn't alone. There were others who were serving his orbit who were helping out. I mean, I certainly was one of the principal ones,
Yes,
but in the end, even I had my limit, and
of
you know,
course.
broke could take it no more, and my wife couldn't take it, and you know, I cut Frank off. I mean, it's sad. I mean, and you know, I wasn't, my behavior wasn't perfect. I did the best I could,
Of course,
and
of course.
I think most people like you would, would, would forgive me for,
Of
in the
course.
end, bailing out. But again, the experience gave me all this material
Yeah.
uh, to write about. Uh, so
And
so in the end, I don't regret what happened. Had I been able to foresee what might have happened, I might have
yes.
gotten out sooner. But no, of course, that's not what happened.
Yes.
And
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 probably during this time, you need to keep in mind that you tried to give them a little more comfort, because they were in a very bad situation and they were living off social security, and Long had this really disruptive person with him, and I think that you guys did your best. Uh, do you know, Peter, if when you met him and you were living this very complex reality, was he still writing? Like, did he have the I don't know how, the word. Like, did he have the capacity to write in that environment?
no, no. I mean, he said on more than one occasion he would be very happy to retire from writing. He was writing only for money. Early in his career anyway. Uh, I mean, ideally, somehow he might have had a job and
Yes.
earned enough in Social Security to be able to afford not to do this. And of course, a lot of people like Bob Price were pestering him to write stories or contribute in some means or another. And of course, they were paying him, and so he had incentive to do so. But I think he long lost any desire to write, whether fiction or nonfiction, just for the sake of it because he wanted to, and so forth. For him at that stage, it was all just a job, and to be honest, the samples I saw of his writing, he just no longer no longer could do it. He could no
Yes.
longer
He didn't have
tell.
the he didn't have the spark.
He didn't have the spark or just the ability to put together two sentences in a coherent way. To
Yes.
be honest, I mean, but gosh, given his age, it's not surprising. I mean, that's anyone's going to decline, uh, even under the best of circumstances, and uh, so I don't know that he was ever under any illusions, even though he would say, "Okay, I've just written my best story yet," or it was all you know sort of
W-
self hype,
Wishful thinking, right?
wishful wishful thinking. I think there were times he spoke of Vida and he retiring someplace nice in the country and not having, just the day to day burden of,
Yes.
having enough to eat and paying the rent.
Yes.
His tragedy is, I mean, he grew up in a very comfortable upper middle class
Yes.
family, the only child, in a way, in circumstances similar to Lovecraft's. When Lovecraft was a boy, and again, Lovecraft went through this same kind of loss when his
Yeah.
grandfather died, and here he is living at home uh, until first his father dies, and I think his mother and he lived together. And he talks about his writing career, but there's and he again in his letters thinks, "Gosh, someday I've got to be able to support himself." But in the meanwhile, he takes the easy road of having his meals and his rent paid by his father, who has this well-paying profession as a dental surgeon.
Yes.
And back then, 20s to 30s, I mean, Social Security. Actually, it's the 90th anniversary of the Social Security Act, 1935. That was just getting started, and uh, it's again an example of the writer, who wants to write, for love and not money,
Exactly.
and and as a practical matter, unless you've got a personal wealth from your family, it's going to be a hard road. And I mean, there's
Totally.
so few who break out and make it commercially, and I think Frank tried in his way. Maybe he was more practical minded than Lovecraft, but in the end, he just was unable to
Yes.
uh, build up the kind of security that he would have liked, for his later years.
Totally. For those who don't know, you can read that in Long Memories, and you can also read my introduction to the Brazilian Hounds of Tíndalos. But basically, Frank, he never learned how to have a job. He didn't finish college, and he was supported by his family when he was younger. And unfortunately, the world of pulp books crumbled, and then
Right,
science fiction crumbled, and gothic novels. So not everybody's Stephen King, and unfortunately, this is more common than we imagine. Uh,
right. I mean, he tried to stay up with the times, with the shifting markets, with the end of the pulp era. There were, mass market paperbacks, and he was writing these gothics under his wife's name. Yeah,
yes,
he was doing the best he could to write commercial fiction for the markets that were changing over the decades, and he could only uh, go so far, and so that's the unfortunate, sad ending to his writing career.
exactly. And Peter, let me ask you something. When you think about this story, and you see how Frank, as a writer, he died in poverty. And recently, I'm in another translation project that I'm going to talk to you later. I can't talk on the podcast about it, but it's about Mary Shelley, and she also experienced extreme poverty. And Lovecraft, when he was in New York, he had a lot of problems with poverty too. Uh, do you, from the pulp writers that you know in this time with Frank and Lovecraft and Howard, did you see other similar stories about guys that didn't become a big hit, or they became a big hit after they died?
To be honest, I don't really know. I mean, someone like Robert E. Howard, could make a living at it and was very successful and prolific. I mean, he was an example of, you know, the best of that kind of writer. And
Yes.
of course, sad to say, his life was shortened by his killing himself after his mother died. So who knows whether he could have survived over the long run. But I know someone like Fritz Leiber, maybe. But again, I think someone like Leiber maybe had another career as an actor, or they had other sources of income, other careers, uh, to make a decent living. So I can't offhand point. I mean, well, Clark Ashton Smith, I don't know much about him relative to others, but somehow I don't. He kind of limped along, looking after his elderly parents,
Yes.
I guess he was no longer writing, but I don't think he was starving by the end of his uh, life, and he lived a normal long life. Uh,
Yes.
but but I mean, in the case of Long, Lovecraft is sort of the classic story of the impoverished writer. It was certainly in Lovecraft's case unreckoned, or I should say, not recognized enough in his lifetime, and
Yes.
then just has this amazing resurrection in the decades after his death, and uh, which is something I and other Lovecraft fans from long ago could never have imagined
Yes.
that he would become such a commercial hit in a way. And obviously, he was doing something right, and
Yes.
he struck some chord uh, that's sort of universal with people across cultures and generations and so forth that makes his work
And many new
still.
writers,
Well,
right? Many new writers, they get inspired and they start to write. It's
oh yes,
amazing.
he's an inescapable influence for any subsequent writers. From Stephen King on, and Stephen King will acknowledge is the influence, and he's inescapable. But of course, there are many writers in more recent times who make a deliberate effort to sort of move beyond or do something different. I think Ramsey Campbell's an example, very much
Yes.
influenced by Lovecraft early on, and then sort of done his own thing. And of course, in recent times, Lovecraft has been redone by authors taking, whether it's from a racial standpoint, or a feminist standpoint, sort of rewriting his works in ways that highlight
They are
uh,
amazing. Yeah.
contemporary issues, and almost as a kind of sounding board. Okay, well, here's this guy who, at this point, has sort of political and social views that are kind of out of step with today, and here's my response. Uh,
Yes.
so he's still kind of vital in that way.
Yes.
I mean, so many popular writers, once they die, not only they're forgotten, well, their works are forgotten.
Yes.
Uh, uh, you, I'm not sure if uh, I can give a good example of that, but there, hosts of writers who are big names in their day, made a lot of money, and they're forgotten because their work simply doesn't live.
Exactly.
Uh, have something there to make it, worthy of later generations' attention. So
Yes.
Lovecraft was fortunately one of those. And yes, I mean, well, if we get back to Frank, well, maybe he wasn't really doing initially. Sort of, he was influenced by Lovecraft, and yes, maybe his is the first mythos story, but he was not doing the same
No.
thing as Lovecraft at all. And his work just in these sort of science fiction, fantasy, gothic, just don't have the staying power of Lovecraft's fiction.
Yes. And did you ever consider Because, for example, we have some stories that authors they divide the story. One starts, the other finishes. Did you consider doing that with Frank when you were thinking about Pope Time or other stories, or you knew that it was a difficult proposition?
You mean writing some sort of sequel
Yeah,
to Frank's,
like
or trying to or try to
writing.
writing in his voice, a continuation,
Yes.
or picking up an unfinished uh, piece. No, no, it never. Uh, I never thought I wanted to try to imitate Frank, or pick up something that he had left off. We never talked about collaborating. So no, no, I wanted to use Frank, but use him in my own voice, my own
Yes.
language, for my own purposes, rather than do some sort of tribute to his own work.
And it would probably be very complex psychologically because
Yeah, that'd be too close, too close.
yes, too close. I totally agree. Peter, my last question to you, because we are almost out of time, is who in this, if you in this new generation of authors, who are the authors that you like or that you read? If you follow new authors, are you into anybody right now?
Uh, good question. Good question. I mean, I've largely not kept up with current uh, horror fiction, um, but there's still some good stuff uh, being put out, and I read actually something published by Derek Hussey's press, by a British author named now I'm drawing a blank on it. It's called the Witch's Abbey. It's a
The
short
Witch's
novel.
Abbey. Let me see.
Witch's Abbey, Abbey. Uh, British author. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago. Um, he I just read it a short time ago, and it's more of a sort of traditional haunted house story set around World War II. I mean, I could I could run out into my library and look at the spine of the book, and if
Oh, let me
you
plug and
can't,
find it. Oh, that's
uh,
a cute cat. I have seen
yeah,
some of
sorry,
them.
yeah. Uh,
Oh, what is the name of the publishing house? Because I put Tartarus Press, but it's not. It's the other one. It's
no, it's Derek Hippocampus
Hippocampus.
Press.
Yes.
Yeah, you'll find. I mean, he
The
published,
Witch Cult Abbey, maybe?
yes, Witch Cult Abbey.
Witch Cult Abbey. Mark Samuels.
Mark Samuels.
The cover
I
is
like
beautiful.
I like Mark Samuels. He did a wonderful story, a neo Lovecraftian, set in Mexico City
Wow.
in 19, I think in the night, maybe right after Barlow's death. But anyway, the American narrator comes to Mexico, meets this guy who seems to be channeling Lovecraft. He's actually writing stories that seem to be as if Lovecraft had read them, and it's about this
Whoa.
sort of their weird relation. I can't remember the name of that collection. I gave it away, but that's worth that story in particular. I think is just
Oh,
terrific, and I
I
can't.
didn't see. I've just discovered that Mark Samuels is deceased. I didn't know.
Yeah, yes, unfortunately, he died a few years ago. Uh, there's another British author named Reggie Oliver
Ah,
who
very good.
writes wonderful, more ghost stories. Who I think is terrific.
Yes.
And so they're out there, but most of the stuff, if you're writing horror, you're writing basically supernatural thrillers where it's a lot about plot and not so much about style. And
Yes.
uh, there's one other author I discovered not so long ago uh, that was actually a contemporary of Lovecraft, William Sloane. Do you know that name?
No, that's
It-
not familiar. Let me see.
okay, he's mainly a science fiction editor, and he wrote two novels. One is called "They Walk by Night."
I found
I think.
William Milligan Sloane, maybe.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the middle name, but
Yeah,
the title is
was an American fantasy writer. He died in 1974.
right. Well, in
To Walk in the
1936,
Night,
to
1937.
right, right. Well, when I read this novel, I was blown away. It's basically a science fiction novel, but it has a cosmic scope to it,
Mm.
and the style is very different from Lovecraft. So you've got this narrator. It's about this professor who's possessed by something,
Oh,
and they're not sure what it is. But anyway, it's a short novel. It's I was thinking, Lovecraft would have loved this. I mean, it's very different in his approach and style, and yet it's cosmic in scope, and it's basically maybe more science fiction than horror, but it starts out as a fairly realistic story of trying to figure out what's wrong with this guy, what's that
nice.
possessed him, and I recommend that highly. And then he wrote a second novel that's sort of more borderline horror that isn't as good but still worthwhile.
The Edge of
And
Running Water?
The Edge of Running Water, and they're available. New York Review of Books has a volume that collects the two
Nice.
together with an introduction by Stephen King. So that would be my other sort of top recommendation for
Nice.
anyone wanting to read something well that's not Lovecraft.
Right.
It's not well known. It's not commercial in the genre that sort of to me meets the standard of the classics.
And while you were talking about Lovecraft and other authors, I remembered supernatural horror in fiction, and I think that was the big. I don't know how to say in Portuguese. We say sacada. In English is that was the big leap, the big decision that Lovecraft made, because that text helps a lot anyone who wants to discover new stuff. And recently I discovered a book called in a place called Dagon.
Right, right.
Yes, and we
I've not read that.
and it's really good. And
No,
it's funny how these authors vanish.
yeah. Well, no, I mean that's another great accomplishment of Lovecraft's to write this essentially a reading guide for the genre. And so, yes, I use it. I wouldn't know William Hope Hodgson, for example, or so some of these others, and
Ah, let me show
I
you.
wouldn't.
This is the house on the borderline.
Oh, House in the Borderland.
Yeah, it's in the same publishing house that is bringing the Hounds of Tindalus. So
Right,
this is the format of the Hounds of Tindalus that I translated,
right.
and
Yeah,
I also worked on this one. So
yeah,
Frank will be in
yeah.
good company.
Right, right. Well, House in the Borderland, I think, is one of the greats. I reread it a few years ago. I can see why Lovecraft singled it out as certainly the best Hodgson.
The
Yeah,
best.
yeah. That I mean, that's again a classic that you know bears rereading. Uh, or even Lovecraft's recommendation of the Willows as one of the greatest.
Blackwood.
Uh, the Blackwood. I mean, again, that just a sensational story, and you can sort of see how Lovecraft felt some affinities with it. But one big difference in it, typically in a Lovecraft story, you've got a single narrator who's sort of
Yes.
experienced all this. But Blackwood, in a way, does a better job by having two people and one of them not really knowing what's going on, and then there's the other one who's kind of plugged in, and there's a tension between them.
Yes.
I mean that's a big part of the story, and that wasn't Lovecraft's usual
Yes. And
mode.
the tension in the Willows goes to the roof.
Yeah, the
Yes.
tension exactly.
It's
It's
really good.
just incredible. Um, so anyway, just to share another
Yes,
classic
that's
that
amazing.
I think people need to read.
Yes, that's the problem about talking about two bookworms talking, because we could, go we could
Well,
go
sure, sure.
forever, right? Uh,
Right, right.
Peter, I really want to thank you for allowing this small quantity of time so we can talk, because I say small because I could talk to you for days and months.
Obviously, we
Yes.
could talk forever.
But I really
I'm,
thank you so much. Is a huge honor for me, because I became a fan of your work immediately, and for me is appalling that I can talk to you. This is absurd. I think when I said, Peter, let's have a conversation, I think you should have said, no, Fernando, it's impossible. I'm very busy. But no, you said you accepted it, and this is amazing.
oh,
And
well,
the Hounds of Tindalus that we translated would not be the same without you, because
uh,
we had access to the letters, and we talked about Frank, and the work is just beautiful, and that is really we really need to thank you.
well, I need to thank you because I'm not a commercial best-selling author. I'm sort I'm sort of at the kind of sort of the bottom level of the what's sort of maybe worth paying attention to. So I don't get these opportunities too often, and
You are
they're
too
very
grounded, man.
grateful for this opportunity.
Yeah.
So thank you, Luis.
Yes, and I hope that we can do it more times. I will obviously disturb you along 2025 with more emails, because there are more projects, and maybe we have the opportunity to discuss somebody else.
Sure, sure. Let's stay in touch, and I'd be happy to continue the conversation. Later on.
Nice, that's awesome. So, Peter, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. And
Yeah.
as soon as this gets published, I'll tell you. Okay?
Okay, okay. Keep me
Nice.
posted.
See
Thanks again.
you.
Bye
Take
bye.
care. Bye bye.
Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.